Hey y'all, welcome back. It's day 3. We read about Ruby Holler yesterday, which a holler, if you remember, is just basically a valley. It's very much similar to a valley. It's very green. We learned about 2 people that lived within the holler. There was one man at the far end who we don't know much about, just keeps to himself, right? And then we learned smack dab right in the middle was an older couple, 60 years old. It's not that old, guys. But this 60-year-old couple that lived in the middle of the holler, and they didn't have electricity. They didn't have a washing machine. They didn't have a television, y'all. Let's just say that. They didn't have a television. They had to read books and things and play outside, right? I know a lot of you don't know what that means. But we learned about the holler. And then in the 4th chapter, which was called Mush, we learned a little bit about living at the Boxton Creek home, which isn't very exciting to live at, is it? No talking, no doing this, no doing that, no running, no being a kid. And then we also learned about the Hoppers, which is a family that Florida and Dallas had gone to live with, that wasn't particularly meant to have Dallas and Florida come join them, right? We learned that they liked money, but they didn't like anybody else touching their money, which I get that. I don't like people touching my money either. But in all seriousness, they were just little kids trying to play with quarters and dollars and had to go back to the home because the other family didn't really care about that. So that was the Hoppers. So today we are going to read a couple more chapters. I hope you are enjoying this so far. And we'll start. So chapter 5 is called The Thinking Corners. Dallas had been showing one of the younger boys how to throw a tennis ball over the roof of the Boxton Creek home. You pull your arm back like this, see? And then you have to aim high. And at the last minute, snap your wrist like this, see? The ball sailed upward, curving toward the roof, but veered suddenly, crashing into a window. Now, Dallas sat on a stool in the basement, thinking corner. The first few minutes in the corner were the hardest because he'd see that damp cement wall and the ghostly cobwebs and spiders. I don't like spiders. And he'd be reminded of a cellar that he and Florida had once been locked in. He closed his eyes. Not going there, he told himself. Not going into that cellar. Going somewhere else. Going somewhere green and sunny. Going where there are trees and birds. And soon enough, he was there in his mind. In the place where trails wound through the woods and where a boy could throw anything he wanted. And it wouldn't get him in trouble. 2 hours later, Mr. Trepid opened the basement door and called out to Dallas. Out of there, boy! Got another reservation for that space. As Dallas climbed the steps, he saw, who do you think? He saw Florida standing beside Mr. Trepid, trying to wiggle out of his grasp. I was just running. I didn't mean to stomp on those flowers, she told Mr. Trepid. And that hole in the wall, I was just trying to get a little air in that putrid room. You just go down there and think about it, Mr. Trepid said. As Florida passed Dallas on the steps, she said, My turn. Hope you kept the seat warm. Florida stomped across the basement room and kicked the wall and the stool. I heard that, Mr. Trepid called from above. You've just earned yourself an extra hour down there. Putrid man, putrid basement, putrid thinking corner. She sat on the stool, her arms crossed. He can't make me think if I don't want to. She tried to make her mind a blank white canvas, but as hard as she tried, she couldn't keep that canvas blank. Splotches found their way in it. Splotches which turned into images, which turned into people. That morning, she had seen a woman pass by the home. The woman was tall and large-boned, with frizzy, unruly hair. That's a little bit like my hair, Florida had thought. Hey, Mom! She had called down. The woman, startled, turned to Florida, who immediately ducked back in the doorway of the home. Florida peeked around the door, watching the woman hurry away. Now in that basement thinking corner, Florida saw the woman again in her mind, and she thought, well, She could have been my mother. And that reminded her of the man she'd seen with Mr. Trepid the night before, in the alley behind the home. The man's back was to her, but he stood in a sort of loose-limbed way, his feet splayed out, his arms swinging at his sides. For some reason, his standing like that reminded her of Dallas. She almost cried out, "Hey, Dad!" But then the man had turned, and she saw his matted hair, and there was something about him that frightened her. She was glad she hadn't called out to him. My father wouldn't look like that, she thought. Now she opened her eyes and saw a spider scurrying down the wall. She hopped off her seat, picked up the stool, and hurtled it across the wall, smashing the spider. You go, girl. The basement door opened. Mr. Trepid said, "I heard that! Keep that up and you're going to be down there all day." Chapter 6, The Opportunity. Mrs. Trepid had a hold of Florida's arm and was pulling her down the hall. "I wasn't doing anything, honest," Florida said. "Where are you taking me?" Mr. Trepid dragged Dallas in through the back door. "I was just digging up some worms. Are you accidentally squeezing my arm?" Mr. and Mrs. Trepid had ushered Florida and Dallas into their office and closed the door. "Don't sit down. You're a mess," Mrs. Trepid had said. "I wasn't going to sit anywhere anyway," Florida had said. "Take off those I've been bad shirts and put on these clean ones." "What for?" Florida had asked. "You said we had to wear these scratchy, smelly, putrid things for the rest of the week." "Take them off. You two are going somewhere." Florida flashed Dallas a look. They'd heard this before, too many times. "No, we're not. We're gonna be here until we die." Mrs. Trepid sank into her chair. "Oh, I certainly hope not. Oh, I certainly pray that is not the case." Mr. Trepid said, "We have an opportunity for you. A splendid opportunity." He looked at his wife. "Don't we, Mrs. T? Don't we have a splendid opportunity for these two young people?" "We're not going to do any more of those foster places. If that's what you've got in mind, you can just forget it," Florida said. Dallas touched Florida's elbow. "Well, we might if it was the right place, like a mansion or something." As Mr. Trepid smiled a slow smile, the light sparkled off his gold front tooth. "This is a grand opportunity. I suppose you could consider it temporary, very temporary, foster arrangement." "Not going. That last place you sent us had more fleas than a mangy dog and a zillion snakes." "Well, not quite a zillion. 100 zillion, and lizards, and that guy was crazy. That guy was a lunatic." Mrs. Trepid winced. "Perhaps that last placement was ill-advised. But this is a traveling opportunity," Mr. Trepid interrupted. His tongue slithered over his gold tooth. Florida and Dallas exchanged a look. "What sort of traveling are you talking about?" Florida whispered to him. "Don't trust them. Don't you fall for it. They're probably sending us to Siberia." Mrs. Trepid opened a folder on her desk. "Let's see," she said, pulling out a pamphlet. "There's a river trip across the state to the Rutabaga River." Florida leaned toward the desk. "Huh," she said. And Mrs. Trepid pulled out another pamphlet from her folder. "And let's see, there's also this little trip to Kangadoon." Dallas strained to see the pamphlet. "You mean the Kangadoon way out in the ocean, that Kangadoon?" In his mind, he had already propelled himself there. He was splashing in the ocean and running through the hills. I think I'd be doing that too. Mr. Trepid handed the Rutabaga pamphlet to Florida and the Kangadoon one to Dallas. "We have a very, very nice and respectable couple." "Don't trust them," Florida whispered. "Remember the last very, very nice couple?" with the snakes. Dallas saw himself climbing a tall, tall tree in Kangadoon and perching a branch high above the hills. He had a spyglass, and he was surveying the ocean. On the lookout for pirates. Mr. Trepid continued. And this very, very, very nice and respectable young couple are looking for some strapping, strong young people. To do what? Be their slaves, hose down their hogs, cutting out the snake pits? Mr. Trepid folded his hands as if in prayer. This very, very nice and respectable couple are looking for 2 young people to accompany them to the Rutabaga River and to Kangadoon. Now, during your summer vacation. Dallas, up in his imaginary tree in Kangadoon, had spotted a ship far out in the ocean. Pirates! However, Mrs. Trepid said, they're not going together. They need one person to go to the Rutabaga and one to go to Kangadoon. You mean we'd split up? You can't do that. You're not splitting us up. We're never splitting up. It's only for 3 months, she said. Unfortunately. Dallas blinked himself back to Mr. and Mrs. Trepid's office. Well, do we get to meet these pirates first? What pirates? What on earth are you talking about? The people. Do we get to meet them and see if they're a bunch of lunatics or what? Mrs. Trepid smiled. But of course, Mr. T. Mr. Trepid had scuttled out of the office and returned minutes later with a white-haired couple. Allow me to introduce Mr. Tiller Morey and his wife, Sari. Dallas stared at the man, whose left eye looked a bit droopy. Maybe he'd worn a patch there. Florida looked at Dallas. A couple of lunatics. A couple of old lunatics. There are your next 2 chapters of Ruby Holler, guys. I want you to be thinking about what you think about this opportunity that Florida and Dallas are getting. Do you think it sounds too good to be true? What makes you think that? Or do you think this is a cool opportunity for them and you're excited to see what adventures they could possibly go on? What kind of adventures do you think they might go on? What would you want to go on if you were them? I'm not telling you what my thoughts are because I already know what's happening. But I hope you guys enjoyed today and I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.